And so 80% of the food from within 10 miles, that means that it's a celebration every time you're there of all of the artisan food producers in the area. It's a wonderful thing. So Claire's developed this creative financial model in partner with the Hardwick Restaurant Group to do it. Oh, and then here's the other nice thing. Claire's doesn't have to pay rent for 2 years. Hardwick Restaurant Group created this setup so that they don't require any rent for 2 years. They're still able to do this 3% return to folks. I can get into details of that with you if there's more questions later. But boy, that's a pretty sweet deal. Starting a restaurant, you don't have to pay rent. And only $75,000 to get a restaurant going? This is a nice restaurant. It's a 55-seat restaurant and bar. So it's not just a little hole somewhere. And it's not a white tablecloth place at all. It's kind of slightly fancier than a pub or a tavern. But it has a very festive atmosphere in there. And the food is wonderful. So those are 2 examples of creative financing that's happened in our town, and there's lots of others on the financial side. What I wanted to do here is to see what questions you guys might have on any of the financial aspects of how do banks, lenders, organizations that might give grants, investment, how does any of that work? Could it work? So any questions and ideas around that? It's certainly a big issue and a challenging one. Yeah?
I'm interested in the government's role in all this, whether it's like local government or at the state level, how much support was given financially for that.
You all hear that question? Okay, so I'll ask other folks to speak a little louder, but I'll repeat it for you. Government's role, state and federal government's role and support in any of these kind of things. Government. Isn't it always just best if government kind of just stays out of your way and tries to stay like within 10 years of where you are and keep up? I've seen some pretty amazing investments in the Canadian government in things. It is great. You guys are, your government is more supportive of some of these things than ours, I think. Hopefully that's starting to change. But in my company, there was no federal or state governmental support. We have gotten a few innovative grants for developing appropriate equipment that then is shared with other farmers too. In Claire's, there wasn't anything. We have the center has gotten some grants from the Department of Agriculture in Vermont, and we will hopefully get some grants from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which, by the way, is really turning around. It's really authentic. If any of you have been paying attention to the news coming out of the USDA, it's a lot of good news. And they're actually asking us a lot of questions on a pretty regular basis. Like, imagine my shock when I pick up the phone and it's Secretary Vilsack, the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, saying, we've got some questions about how you think healthy food systems should be built and what role the USDA should have. So I kept him on the phone for a long time. And there's really, there's good stuff happening with that. So I would say that the USDA and the Vermont Department of Agriculture are getting better. But Vermont Department of Ag especially has been putting a lot of support behind it, dairy. And dairy deserves a lot of support, but not to the exclusion of many other aspects of agriculture in the state that are thriving on their own. If there's any other questions on the financing side?
Sort of financing, but what, just buying farm, say, young couple, want to get started farming. An older couple maybe is tired, but they don't really want to give up. How do people get started?
Yeah, the question is about transition from one generation to another on a farm, perhaps not in the same family, but how to make sure young farmers can get started. There's the young farmer movement happening in the U.S. that's really big. Has anybody heard of the greenhorns? You ought to check this out. Write this one down. I'm not going to tell you too many things to make a note of. But go home on your computers and watch the Greenhorns trailer of their movie. This is a movie made by young farmers about the young farmer movement across the United States. And it is very powerful. It's going to be released at the Sundance Film Festival this year. And so that's a very exciting thing. And with that, and with many other discussions, there's been a lot of case studies on this transition. And I was speaking earlier with somebody about this, about this organization called Land for Good, Kathy Roof. And her organization works to develop strategies by which intergenerational land transfers can happen. And one of the things that I know a friend of mine who participated in this program did was, it was an orchard. And he worked on this orchard for 2 years as the assistant to the owners. The owners were in their late 60s and ready to wrap it up. They didn't have any money saved for retirement. And they didn't want to sell their farm to a developer. That's how they could cash out and make a lot of money. The really troubling thing is that if farmers can't save anything for retirement, they work so hard, and you've got this property that you could sell for millions of bucks at the end. It's a tough position. It's a really genuinely tough position. So what my friend did, though, is he worked for 2 years and got paid. Then he worked for 2 years, and the farmer didn't do any work anymore, so he ran the farm for a couple of years, and he got kind of like half a salary or something like that. Eventually, after another year, he got up to full salary. Meanwhile, all the profits were going to these guys. I think it was a 10-year process. And he eventually was being able to draw a salary from this farm. This is an existing orchard, 80 acres of apples. And there was enough profits that the couple was able to save enough over that final 5 years of that stretch for their retirement, and they sold him the farm at half price, basically. Not development values, but I think it was about $2,000 an acre for an existing orchard. It's pretty good. And so he got it for this. He got all his experience in the process, and this transfer happened. They stay living on the farm, and they can stay there living on the farm, rent-free, all of that, until they die. They don't have any kids. So, you know, that's one example anyway. There's another question here.
You're really interested in your convertible debt offering. Is the 6% a straight interest, or is that compound interest?
Compounds. I'd be happy to tell you more about that after, too, if there's any other little details. Oh, now that hands are going up, y'all are going. I'm going to take 2 more questions, and then I'm going to get into another topic talking about processing and distribution infrastructure. Yes?
Just had a question about whether this has come up in your potluck discussions, is when you're talking about growth at the rate you're talking about, is there any discussion about an appropriate size, or is it, you know, I often think, well, we really need to grow. Should we grow? You know, why should we grow, and what are the risks and what are the downsides of doing that? And you know, how do you get to that point where you're saying, okay, well, small is beautiful, and this is how we started off, and suddenly we're, you know, a company that's nowhere near where we with the values that we started off with, even within ourselves, because of the growth and suddenly shipping seeds or whatever it is across the nation instead of just across the state. And is that, you know, where we want it to be, and how do you balance those, and what kind of discussions are you having about that?
I would say that's certainly a very personal question. For anybody involved is going to be different. People have their own goals and their own concepts of that, but scale appropriate to our region and to the size of the community and whatnot is certainly an important one. And yeah, we definitely talk about that a lot. And I've thought about